UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson finally succumbed to the pressure mounted by his Tory colleagues. His position became untenable after a wave of resignations. He quit as the Conservative Party leader but will continue in office until a new Prime Minister replaces him. But his dent in popularity was not an overnight phenomenon. A succession of scandals and his lax response prompted his own cabinet to turn on him. The most infamous of all was the Partygate scandal. Allegations and videos surfaced in November last year, forcing officials to probe the incident. An investigative report found that 16 gatherings were held between May 2020 and April 2021. Jhonson was, of course, fined for the COVID-linked lockdown-breaking party. But it didn't end there, did it? From Downing Street flat refurbishment to breaking ministerial code, to facing flack for rising taxes and cost of living in the UK, Jhonson had a dramatic, tempestuous 3 years in office. But the tipping point was his handling of the sexual misconduct scandal in which his party's deputy chief whip, Chris Pincher, was accused. His cabinet ministers quit, saying they had lost confidence in Johnson's leadership amid shifting explanations about his handling of the scandal. After several flip-flops, the Prime Minister sought to come clean about the whole controversy, but the debacle was only the latest to hit Jhonson, who last month narrowly survived a trust vote triggered by similarly shifting stories about lockdown-breaking parties in government offices. It's ironic, to say the least, that Boris Johnson, under whose leadership the Conservative Party won the highest majority of 365 of 650 seats in the Parliament, mind you, the only leader to have secured the biggest victory for Conservatives since Margaret Thatcher, is now the fourth shortest-serving Prime Minister in the UK. True Shakespearean-style rise and fall of ruler. A tragedy indeed. But it's not the end for the Conservatives yet. So what happens next? For one, Mr. Jhonson intends to continue as Prime Minister until his colleagues choose a new leader. If a PM wants an early election, he or she can request the Queen to dissolve the Parliament, but snap elections are highly unlikely given the drastic fall in Tory party popularity. They were even badly beaten in 2 special by-poll elections. So taking that risk could cost them the power they hold. Their best bet is to elect a new Prime Minister. Candidates need the support of at least 8 MPs to join the race. Through a series of voting, this is brought down to just 2. And then the final 2 candidates are left. All the Conservative Party members around the country, not just MPs, vote for the winner. And this brings us to the crucial part. Who will be throwing their hat in the ring for the race? You'll be surprised to know that a good lot of frontrunners are of Asian origin. Rishi Sunak, Indian origin MP from North Yorkshire since 2015. He was the finance minister in Jhonson's cabinet and the son-in-law of Infosys co-founder Narayan Murthy. Sajid Javid, a Pakistani origin MP since 2010 and was the health secretary in Jhonson's cabinet. Nadeem Zahawi, an Iraqi origin MP since 2010. Preeti Patel, Home Secretary who stoked controversy for her hardline stance on immigration. The others include Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary, and Dominic Raab, the Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary. So how will the Conservative Party fill the vacuum and regain lost glory? And who has the edge in the premiership race? To discuss this, I'm joined by Sushant Sareen, Senior Fellow at the ORF, and JK Tripathy, former Ambassador. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Now, before I come to you, let's listen to what Mr. Jhonson had to say after he stepped down as the Conservative Party leader.
In the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much and when we have such a vast mandate and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward.
Mr. Tripathi, I'd like to come to you first. These are unprecedented developments happening in the UK, and I'm astounded at the gravity of discontent in the Tory government that it took about 57 odd government officials to force the Prime Minister out of power.
Yes, you see, Mr. Lobo, it's like Boris Johnson behaving like a mini Trump, Donald Trump, clinging to the chair till the last and refusing to step down, though knowing it well that he has lost majority, and though realizing it well that number of scandals, sexual scandals, pornographic use used by the ministers, then his own misdeeds like Partygate, etc. He knew that these things are coming. The writing was on the wall, but even then he decided not to pay any heed to it. And for the last 2.5 years, you see, since COVID, what happened is not only these scandals or his own behavior, but then Britain's UK's economy is going down. And I was surprised that despite the fact that the UK is not very much directly affected by the Ukraine crisis, not at least as much as Germany and France are, but then UK comes very close second to US when it comes to pumping in assistance to Ukraine. So this, not only this, then Brexit also had its stall on Boris Johnson's government.
Correct.
Yes, Mr.
Right. Mr. Sareen, I'd like to bring you in here. Now, there's been a spate of resignations. What happens to those posts? How are those going to be filled up? And what are the challenges to put the system back in place?
I think it'll be just a couple of days. It won't be much longer than that. I think the Tory... Look, this is not the first time something like this is happening. In British politics, this is pretty much par for the course, that a sitting Prime Minister loses the majority support in the party and is made to quit. So they have a very well-oiled kind of a system. There will be an election within the party. It might take a few days, maybe a week or two at best. I don't think it will be longer than that. And in the meantime, I think Mr. Jhonson had already filled up some of the posts which had become vacant. So in a manner of speaking, they are all in a caretaker position. And once the new Prime Minister is elected from the Tory party, then, the new cabinet will also be formed. And of course, there will be a lot of, the typical kind of political give and take between the various party leaders, factions, what have you. Mm-hmm. But that's a very well-oiled kind of a machine. So I don't foresee any major issues as far as this is concerned. The larger issue, however, is going to be that while I completely understand that in Britain and in many other Western countries, they tend to put the leadership at a pedestal. They tend to have expectations from leaders, which are probably a trifle unrealistic. But at the same time, maybe there is something to be said for those holding leaders to such high standards. If you look at it, Partygate was not that big a deal from South Asian perspective. Right. I wouldn't call it that it was a very big deal. But from a British perspective, certainly. From a European perspective, certainly. So yeah, I suppose there's a cultural difference as far as this is concerned.
Mm-hmm. You did say that it's not a big deal because some posts were already filled by Mr. Boris Johnson there, and some will be filled in the next few days. From firings to hirings to resignations, the Tory party has some serious HR recruitment work to do here. But, what I'd like to, bring your attention to is, can the country afford to leave, whatever government posts vacant? Can they afford to have so many changes at a really crucial time? Because we're talking about a time where inflation is highest in the UK in so many years. Cost of living has risen, taxes are risen. So having all of these shifts in the government, can the country afford it?
Yeah, I think they can. Look, this is not a Pakistan, or this is not one of those tottering democracies. This is a very well-established democracy. It has a very strong bureaucracy to back it. The bureaucracy has maintained its standards. Like Jhonson himself said, that there is something to be said about this eccentricity of changing governments at the drop of a hat. But there are countries which have done this even during very tough times, and they are able to manage this. So I don't have any real apprehensions on that count. A week, 10 days, 2 weeks, there was nothing major that was in the offing that had to be done in the next 3 or 4 days, for which you needed an entire cabinet. It is not exactly a war situation in which Britain is. There are serious difficulties on the economic front and on a couple of other foreign policy and other fronts, but nothing that the British system cannot take and cannot push forward for the next maybe week, 2 weeks, maybe a little longer. So I don't foresee any real problem on that count.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'd also like to bring in here Mr. Tripathy. The Tory party has seen 3 premiership resignations, but each time they bounce back. Why isn't the Labour Party managing to turn the tables despite, the Tory facing so many backlash in the future? You've had even before that, Theresa May also quit mid-term. But each time that happens, the Conservative Party just bounces back. What do you think works in their favour?
You see, at least in the last election, the Conservative Party came back to power on the promises of Brexit. And that is why the British voters have given a huge mandate to Conservative Party. Now, as compared to that, Labour has reduced to 130 or 135, if I'm not wrong, 176 seats out of 533. So certainly in this election, at this time, it will not be possible at all for Labour Party to turn the tables. Though they have started shouting that they are going to bring the no confidence motion against the Prime Minister, and therefore the Prime Minister should resign. Therefore, the Prime Minister should not remain caretaker Prime Minister for more than a week or 2. Because they are not prepared to buy this idea that he will be, that next Prime Minister will be chosen sometimes in 3 months in October or something, somewhere near there. And the process in Conservative Party itself, the process for choosing its leader when there are so many contenders is a little cumbersome. Each contenders have to first show the support of at least six members of parliament behind him or her.
Right.
And then it comes to second stage, there are 12. Third stage, these are elimination stages, At the third stage, he should muster the support of at least 36. And then when two contenders remain in the arena, then the whole
correct. Then the entire membership, not just the MPs, but all the members of the Conservative Party across the country come forward to cast vote. I'd like to bring in my colleague Danish here, who is reporting live from London. We've been, constantly getting all the ground updates from him. Danish, what is happening right now? And when I ask this question, I mean, what's the sentiment among the public? Because, we know that definitely there was a dent in the popularity of Mr. Jhonson there. But at the same time, we did see in the recent by-elections, by-polls, that several Tory leaders had lost. They were badly beaten, thus showing that, there was a sentiment that also reflected among the common masses in the UK. What is their response currently after these unprecedented developments in the country?
Well, it's one of despair and dejection. The British public do not like the fact that this has continued for so long and that the Prime Minister or the Conservative Party have allowed it to fester, something that has been on the horizon for quite a while now. Questions have been raised about Boris Johnson's legitimacy and also, of course, his own capability to continue to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. As we have been speaking about, there have been a whole host of issues that have plagued Boris Johnson's administration. Now, there are other talks that why not have the Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab come up and be the caretaker Prime Minister, considering that he is already the Deputy Prime Minister, given the fact that the public are so much against the very fact of Boris Johnson continuing. Well, if not the public per se, but definitely the huge chunk of Tory MPs who have been elected by the British public are definitely not in favor of Boris Johnson continuing. I mean, the other insider detail that we have managed to gather out now is the fact that the Prime Minister and his wife have planned a lavish and a huge wedding reception in Chequers, which is the Prime Minister's official residence in the countryside. And it seems that the Prime Minister wants to use that facility to host that wedding reception. And perhaps if he is not the Prime Minister, he cannot do that anymore. And that explains why he was so desperate to cling on to this post of the Prime Ministership. That is just one talk that we have picked up, but there is a lot of credence in that particular aspect, because as we have seen over the last few days, despite resignations from senior cabinet ministers down to the parliamentary private secretaries in the chain, he has defied all political logic and has sought to say that he is here to stay. Very much a disappointment for the British public here that he will still continue to be the Prime Minister, but at the same time, it was the same British public who elected him and gave him the mandate to rule United Kingdom. So we never know what is exactly in store unless the British public votes again in the next general election. But as of now, Boris Johnson to stay as caretaker Prime Minister.
So clearly he is in his final days in the office, enjoying the luxuries and privilege as far as he could. But also, what is next now that he is quit as a Conservative Party leader? What does this mean for the political career of Boris Johnson?
Well, it's highly unlikely that he will bounce back. Maybe a career in House of Lords or a knighthood perhaps later down the years. But it is very difficult to imagine Boris Johnson come back to the forefront of British politics. He will be a very influential backbencher, no doubt. He has the charisma. He has led the Conservative Party to victory. He still has age on his side. He will still be standing up for elections. All those are definitely understood. But it's highly unlikely that he will play an important or a central figure in British politics, or indeed in his own party, as he has done so far. Although they say nothing is uncertain in politics, but past instances, be it the career of John Major or Margaret Thatcher, it is, if some reflection, if some lessons can be learned, it is that once you are humiliated to an extent at which Boris Johnson has been, political comeback is a very difficult proposition. But as I said, he will continue to be a highly sought-after member of parliament representing the Conservative Party, but perhaps nothing beyond that.
That's right, Danish. Extremely sad to see that a politician, a statesman of his caliber, to see a downfall in the past 3 years of him being in office. In fact, I could also just remind our viewers there that he is the only leader after Margaret Thatcher under whom the party won the maximum seats of 365 out of 650 seats, and also the fourth shortest serving Prime Minister of the UK. Thank you so much, Danish, for getting us all those details. Mr. Sareen, I'd like to bring you in here. What are the chances of snap elections? Tory leaders face major defeat, as we discussed in the by-poll elections as well. They faced major defeats. Clearly, Mr. Johnson's misgovernance is finding a toehold with the public. Do you think the Tories will steer clear of snap elections when their popularity is already dented? And who would win in an election if it were to be held today?
Look, I think the latest opinion polls gives the Labour a 10-point lead. Which means that Labour will pretty much win the next elections if an election was to be held, in the next couple of weeks. So I don't think there's really any incentive for the Conservative Party to go in for fresh elections. They have the majority in the House, so that's not a problem. Of course, British conventions are very different from, the way politics plays out in the subcontinent. But even out there, if they manage to get a leader, they can recover lost ground. Some of the speculation is that they'll be able to recover lost ground the moment they find a replacement to Boris Johnson. Again, it depends on who the replacement is going to be. The bookies put Ben Wallace, in pole position, but we don't know whether it will be Ben Wallace or, for the first time in British history, you will see a non-white Prime Minister taking office. So all of that remains outstanding right now. We don't know the answers to those questions. So a snap poll looks maybe a little unlikely because there is no incentive for the Conservative Party to go in for a quick election right now.
Right. What are the odds, according to you, for a non-white or someone of an Asian origin becoming the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom?
Well, if
I'm asking Mr. Sareen.
Look, purely from a South Asian angle, it would be a nice change to see a person of color, in the mother of all democracies. But whether that is going to happen anytime soon, we don't know. I think both, the Chancellor of the Exchequer or the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, as well as Sajid Javed, they both have a very good chance. They have popularity. They are young. They've shown themselves to be performers. Very typical conservative, party members. But whether Britain is ready for a coloured Prime Minister is something which remains to be seen. Britain keeps talking about multiculturalism. It keeps talking about all of that stuff, but whether they're willing to take that next step and have, the son or the daughter of an immigrant as the Prime Minister of Britain is something which we'll get to know in the next couple of days.
Right. I'm actually also curious to know Mr. Tripathy's opinion here. What do you think, Mr. Tripathi? Is Britain ready for, a coloured Prime Minister at the moment?
No, I don't think Britain is ready as of now. So that's why I think that in this race for premiership, one name that strikes out to me is the Secretary for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, that is Liz Truss, who is, I think, very much acceptable to both factions, pro and anti-Jhonson. And she's white and by and large non-controversial. So maybe she will make it. I'll put my bet on her.
All right.
Because Sajid Javed or Nadim Zahawi, as Mr. Sareen said, that they are the children of immigrants. They are not of British origin, or Rishi Sunak, Priti Patel. So probably they will not be. I mean, despite howsoever Britain looks like a very open and very democratic country, when it comes to voters, there is no dearth of voters who from within in their mind who think that there should be somebody who is a natural citizen of Britain, whose parents have been British. So that will work, though that will not work openly, but I'm sure that that will work there. So
All right.
my bet is that maybe let's choose.
Okay, fair enough. I'd also like to know who is Sareen betting on. Well, Mr. Tripathy was clear that he wants to bet on Liz Truss. What about you, Mr. Sareen?
So if anybody was asking my choice, I would probably pick up Priti Patel, because I think she's a really feisty woman, a fabulous administrator, a no-nonsense kind of a person. But look, one thing I must tell you, you know, as an Indian, if there's a person of Indian origin who becomes the Prime Minister of Britain, you know, one part of me will feel very happy about it. But, you know, the strategic analyst part of me would be really very cautious if a person of Indian or Pakistani origin was to become the Prime Minister of Britain. Because very often what we've seen is when people of, you know, at least of Indian origin, get positions of responsibility and authority in the Western world, they act far more white than the whites themselves. And they you know, I think they have some problem, and they try and be even tougher than what the whites would be vis-a-vis India, for example, than, you know, otherwise. So I would be a little careful.
So are you indicating at Priti Patel's hardline stance on immigration policies in the UK?
Not just the immigration policies, you know, there are a range of other issues that we have with Britain, with the US. You know, you look at the US, for example, look at the people of Indian origin who become members of the Congress. They act even more woke than the woke. They act more white than the white. They act much bigger India baiters than any white man or anybody else would in Britain, in the US. And I suspect something similar might happen as far as Britain is concerned. So I'm a little, you know, careful in celebrating the ascent of people of Indian origin in many of these countries, at least insofar as politics is concerned. The normal Indian will probably long for India, will wear, you know, will probably be batting for India, do all sorts of things. But people who get into government, people who get into political office, you know, their attitudes, frankly, a lot to be desired.
Perhaps Indians in the UK are less welcoming than whites themselves. Mr. Tripathy, I'd like to know from you, now that we're on the topic and we're discussing what if an Asian origin turns out to be the Prime Minister of the UK, what do you think? How will this affect UK-Asia ties, or particularly UK-India ties?
I don't think it is going to affect UK-India ties or UK-Asia ties at all in any manner. Because when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to dealing with other nations, the national interest of the government, which the minister is representing, comes first. So, like we cannot think that Kamala Harris will in USA, she will overnight turn very pro-Indian, or Priti Patel, or even for India, you know. We would like anybody, if God willing, somebody of foreign origin becomes a minister, we would certainly not like him or her to be unduly soft towards his or her country of origin. We would expect that the person should have his allegiance to his faith to India, not to the country of his or her origin. So similarly, we should not think that if anybody, just because anybody is Indian by origin, will be unduly helpful or unduly
Correct. They
favorable
don't want
for
to come
us.
across as being, softer to one section or one part of the world.
Exactly.
Final comments from both of you. Mr. Sareen, first from you. What do you think from here? How will Mr. Jhonson take his political career? Will it be wise enough for him to continue staying in politics, or perhaps will he have to find an alternate career?
Just a word on a person of Indian origin becoming. Look,
Sure.
I don't expect them to be soft on India. But the problem is they tend to be unduly harsh on India. And that is what my problem is with, people of Indian origin occupying these positions. But as far as Mr. Jhonson is concerned, I would go along with what your analyst Danish said earlier. I think he is going to remain in politics. I wouldn't entirely rule out, although the chances are very slim, I wouldn't entirely rule out a kind of a comeback, because Mr. Jhonson, if he's anything, he's a maverick. And mavericks can do and manage things which, other normal people will not be able to manage. So I suspect he's going to remain in politics. I suspect he is going to remain a somewhat influential voice in British politics. I don't expect a man like Boris Johnson to just fade away because, his position as Prime Minister has become untenable. And I don't expect him to cling on to office for very long because, again, like I said, that's become untenable. It's just not possible that he'll stay on for a couple of months now. I don't think that's going to happen. I would imagine that a change of the Prime Minister would happen in a matter of a couple of weeks at best.
Sure. Mr. Tripathy, what do you think? What will be the next course of action for Boris Johnson here?
Well, certainly coming back to the Prime Ministership will not be possible for him. That is out of question. The only thing that he can do is that he can remain as an influencer in the party, a guide, or he can be made a member of the House of Lords. So, and write books and all those things, the retired politicians do. But certainly he will not come back as Prime Minister. It is out of question.
All right. Fair enough. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on the biggest international story of the day and sharing perspective. It's been a great time discussing with you on what are the next probables, who could be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. On that note, it's time to wrap up this discussion. Thank you so much once again.